So I will hit record now, and it's recording, right? Okay. And so for everyone who's in this panel, just know that you're being recorded. And so if you do open your camera or unmute, you're consenting to being re-uploaded on our YouTube video later on. But yeah, so those were the introductions. I won't go over it. I will do the introductions again because I just started recording. Okay, for everyone who's here, just tune out. This is for the recording. Okay, so starting again from the top, we have Stephen Wakabayashi, he, him, a second generation Japanese Taiwanese American. He is the host of Yellow Glitter, a podcast on mindfulness through queer Asian perspectives, the founder of QTBIPOC Design, which is an organization that empowers LGBTQ plus designers of color with education, mentorship, and networking opportunities. And then we have Nellie Lynn and Juno Lee from the podcast Two Addies and a Coffee, Please. They are Asian American women who have been friends for over a decade, and they created this podcast to share their authentic stories about anxiety, ADHD, bipolar, and various other topics. And next up, we have Jia Shin. She, her, she is a 16-year-old high schooler from Tenafly, New Jersey, and she likes to explore her Asian American identity through writing personal memoirs and journaling. And then she founded You're Not Alone, which is a student-led organization that aims to shed light on the stigmas surrounding mental health. And then finally, last but not least, we have Dr. Uma Lerner, a San Francisco-based psychiatrist specializing in women's mental health. She is also an advisor to hormone health brand Avia, and she's active in her local community as a mom and to increase visibility of diversity and multicultural understanding. And so I think that's all of the panelists that we expected tonight. So thank you everyone for being here. Just a reminder, you're being recorded. And I also wanted to introduce our Director of Outreach, Han, if you want to turn your camera on. She'll be monitoring our chat tonight. So if you have any questions, you can either send it to everyone or you can send it to Han. Okay, I don't know if Han will be turning her camera on, but you can send it to her. Oh, she's there. Hi, Han. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, so I'm the Director of Outreach at the Asian Articles. And yeah, I'm excited to see what you guys have to say. Yeah.
Okay, so that is all for the introductions. I'm sorry they ran a little bit long because I forgot to hit record in the beginning, but we'll get started officially now. So if you're attending, just go to view and hit speaker mode to see everyone that is spotlighted. And we'll start with the first question of the night. I'll keep it general because this is a pretty big topic with a lot of subtopics that we can get into. And so I wanted to ask everyone here, you can all answer, but what are some experiences that you've all had where you realized your own internalized racism and just maybe specific instances of it and stuff like that? So anyone can start. Okay, Dr. Uma, since you have your mic unmuted, do you want to start for us?
Sure. I mean, something that we had been talking about prior to recording was just the issue of language and how much we kind of align or don't align ourselves with English or whatever the dominant language is at the time. And I could say for myself, my parents are immigrants, and so I was the first person born here, and their language is Tamil, and they had initially planned to teach me Tamil, but then actually my pediatrician said, "Oh, don't do that. You're going to slow her English down." And my parents said, "Oh, okay." Even though they come from a part of the world where it's very normal to speak multiple languages, they defer to this pediatrician, and I never grew up learning Tamil. And so I've only ever spoken English. And when I went for my oral exams in psychiatry, one of the feedback that I got was, "Oh, wow, your English is so good." And I thought, well, it's the only language I speak. We speak the same English. Like, what a ridiculous thing to say. But of course, because of the way I look, that was considered to be a compliment.
For me, yeah, I can really relate to that. My parents were also immigrants, and I was actually sent to ELL, which is the English language learners program at school in elementary school. That's because I used to live in Korea. And then from there, my parents decided to speak only English in the house, and they told me to speak English. And eventually, it grew up to be that now I no longer can speak Korean, and they speak Korean to me, but I respond in English. So I can't communicate with my relatives because my immediate family lives in America, but all of my relatives, my grandparents, cousins live in Korea. So whenever I visit Korea, I just cannot communicate with them, which is such a frustrating thing. And I actually wrote about this in a piece because I like to write a lot about my Asian identity. And I was talking about how I can't speak with my grandpa anymore. He has a facial disformity, and whenever he came to visit America, I actually rejected him, and I said, "This is not my grandpa." Like when people ask me, "Is that your grandpa?" I was like, "No, he's not." And I just have a lot of regrets. Like I also used to wish that he would actually die, which is such a terrible thing to wish upon someone, like your own family member. But like now I really regret that I had to forget my native language because I had to assimilate to the American education and American culture.
Yeah, and I think that's it's a really relatable thing to bring up because I also answer in English when my mom speaks to me in Chinese. And also the thing about, you and your grandpa, I actually watched Minari. I don't know if you guys saw that film. I watched that pretty recently, and it kind of reminded me of how the little boy in the movie, he rejected his grandma because, and quote, she smelled like Korea. And I think that's something that a lot of kids internalize, that when they're younger they're American and they don't want to have that extra word in the beginning of it. But that's also something that I wanted to sort of segue into, um, that do you guys think, well, let me rephrase this, how do you guys think the media and sort of the representation of Asians, or the lack thereof, has affected your own opinion of yourself as an American and as an Asian American, and how has it led to experiences of internalized racism that you've come across in your life?
For me, growing up Asian American, also with first gen immigrant parents, I think when I was like in second grade, I really wanted just to use forks and spoons because I was like, oh, that's the normal way to eat food. And I hated using chopsticks. So when I go to school and everyone else's lunch is like Lunchables and things like that, I also wanted that. And that seemed to me like that's the typical food that every American kid is eating. And I wouldn't want to eat rice. I was talking to my parents, like, why do we eat rice every single day? I don't want to eat rice. I hate noodles. And I think that really hit a nerve with like my dad because he was really proud of being Chinese and he wanted me to be proud of my heritage as well. But when I was like so young, all I wanted to do was fit in. So I remember just like refusing to use chopsticks. And my parents got really angry and they threw away all of the spoons and forks in our house and forced me to like use chopsticks and to really embrace my culture. So I feel like if I didn't have my parents, I probably would not have known how to speak Chinese or Mandarin. They really forced this on me. And now I am really thankful that they did that because I can speak with my grandparents in Chinese. I can speak with my parents and communicate with them. And I feel this rage every time I see other people rejecting their culture because it reminds me of me when I was younger. And it's sad because in media, Asians are seen as subpar compared to whites. And like the male character is always seen as like the nerdy, dorky person, or the woman is hypersexualized and objectified. So you're always seen as an object or accessory to a white person's narrative versus your own character with your own nuanced stories. So I feel like without that media representation that we see now, like Fresh Off the Boat, Crazy Rich Asians, those are just like some movies and TV shows that have been popping up. So I feel like for the younger generation, like Gen Z growing up, this is going to be such a pivotal moment for them versus how we grew up in a time where, TikTok, YouTube wasn't as large in our cultivation of childhood.
Yeah, I'll chime in here too. Random story about the language. I was in second grade, and I remember speaking to another friend who was Chinese, and we were speaking Mandarin. And my second grade teacher got so mad, she stopped the entire class. I was like, "We speak English here," and then started speaking Spanish to another kid, and said, "How does that make you feel?" And I was like, so I was so traumatized, and from then on, I was just really ashamed to speak Mandarin at home, especially. And it, yeah, it wasn't until the past few years I started talking about this with other friends, colleagues of mine, of microaggressions that we face in terms of how do we show up. And then I would say back to media, Nelly, what you just mentioned, just so strong and powerful, this accessory role that we have, where I mean, two parts, right? It's never seen as the attractive, beautiful, like you just are complete. You somehow have this piece of you that's missing, that this white hero has it that can provide it to you. And so I think this plays a big role in how Asians especially view themselves, and the microaggressions that we carry is because we feel almost that we're incomplete, right? That there's a piece of us somebody else has, somebody white has, and this yearning to be a part of this culture that also vehemently, you know, is very aggressive towards. And I think it's beautiful now, just like what's happening on social media, TikTok, with so much more representation. But I would say, especially for generation before, we're just starting to have some voice and representation, especially diversity in media and just different channels. And so, well, I'm really excited where we're headed towards. Yeah, we have so much work to do in that space. Yeah.
Yeah, and Juno, do you have anything to add?
I definitely relate to the difficulty accepting speaking in a different language growing up, especially because I'm also from an immigrant family and I had to go to a lot of like legal shit for to like deal with different processes. And I saw very, very big differences in the way they looked at our family and wanted to help us based on our fluency in English. So if my family was speaking loudly in Korean, I'll tell them to be quiet. And then I'll speak really loudly in slang in English. So they're like, oh, okay. They're like, chill. I want to help them. And as for like not being voiced in media, I think growing up in New York City, I actually was a little bit used to people understanding a bit about Korean culture, like K-pop is cool, K-dramas, whatever. And I was like, okay, people know about this. And when I moved to Denver, that was largely white. And suddenly I realized that nobody knew anything about Korean culture here. And suddenly people were just referencing a bunch of things about like Japanese culture to me. And I would just get these really weird comments that made me feel like my specific culture was not unique or special anymore. And it even made me question like how proud I was of stuff because even then like really stupid things like I wanted to wear a hanbok, like a traditional Korean wear for a photo shoot, and they'd say like, "Oh, kimonos are prettier. I think you would look really good in one." And I was just like, "Oh, maybe I do look better in one." And people would say like, "Oh, Japanese culture is really popular in America. So is Chinese. What are Koreans known for?" I don't think that's very popular here. So I think just growing up in that environment makes, even if I know internally how big and awesome our culture is, if I'm constantly being told by the people around me that it doesn't exist, then I just can't help feeling the same sometimes. And it wasn't until I moved back home where I was like, oh, okay. And it had to take like, it took multiple months of talking to other Asian Americans, other Korean Americans, and talking back with my family. And I actually thought I was uncultured a lot of the time because they would reference all these other, like, I don't know, actors and movies and things. And I know some, but like all the stuff I see at home are K-dramas and movies and game shows in Korean. Um, so yeah, just seeing that huge difference is always very jarring.
And I'm actually just realizing from what Gino said, like, I feel like most of my Asian friends are also dealing with internalized racism because in middle school, I was like kind of obsessed with K-pop. I like even wanted to be a K-pop idol. and I like went to classes and stuff. When I told people like I like BTS, they're like, "Ew, you're a BTS stan!" Like, and then all the white kids are also like, "Ew, K-pop is so disgusting." And even now, it's just because like my generation, Gen Z, just thinks like BTS is overhyped, or like they just think of like crazy people when you think of K-pop fans, like people like dressed in all merch and like going crazy with their idols. So I just like also had to hide that part of me. Like watching anime, I couldn't tell my friends that I watched anime in middle school because like people thought they also rejected their Asian culture. But like while I was trying to learn to embrace it, people around me were just like rejecting it and saying, "You're so weird for like liking your culture, like doing things that are," or like K-pop and Korean traditional things. So that's just something that I feel really bad about, like having to go through.
Yeah, and actually, me and Gia, we live in towns with pretty similar, what's it called, racial makeups. And so we really have similar experiences when it comes to internalized racism. And I think a large part of that is because, and I think we can all attest to this, is that the environment around us, and especially, like the races that are predominant in our community really have an effect on our own opinions of ourselves. So, for example, I live in a town that's half white and 40% Asian. And so you would expect that there's more, Asians who feel more accepted by their peers. But at the same time, there's this sort of like stark contrast between those who accept themselves fully and those who are really trying to assimilate with the other 50%. And so the other question that I really wanted to bring up was, how do you feel that your own upbringing and your community and the people around you, including your friends and your school and your family, and how that has sort of influenced your own opinion of yourself and, the internalized racism that has come up in your life?
Well, I think, oh my God, I just had a train of thought. It just like came to the station. It just like, it just, well, coming back. You said something that resonated really well, and I was thinking it so hard. And the simulation portion, got it. It came back. There's a full loop. The assimilation portion is so fascinating too, right? Where we see sometimes people on this journey of acceptance, and sometimes they are the aggressors in the system too, where they will call out other Asians for not assimilating, not having these, white traditions. Why are you speaking, not English? And I have posted sometimes a few of my thoughts and just some of these topics on Reddit. And there's a lot of people on Reddit who, especially even if they're in the part of the Asian community, who deny some of these things as real issues. And sometimes the conversation around safe spaces, I think, is a really touchy subject for folks because where I come from, I see the need, right, of exclusive safe spaces as well as inclusive spaces, right? Totally different means for totally different people. And I see a lot of Asian people actually argue back against the need for exclusive spaces for Asian people because they're like, how are we going to be accepted if we can't let white folks into our spaces? How are we? And, I think through learning, especially Uma, I'm sure you have experiences with just like different people have different needs, especially to open up to different stories and different settings that allow it. And so, yeah, I would say, especially in talking about some of these spaces that I hold and trying to validate it, it's come up again and again. Yeah.
Yeah, I do agree on, I don't go on Reddit often, but when I do, some of the things I see on it are quite interesting. But Nelly, did you have anything to say?
Yeah. So I guess for me, growing up, I've only inhabited very like Asian dominated spaces, and that was for a specific reason. Like when I chose to go to a certain college. I was like, I'm not going to school in the South. Like, there's no way. So I just ruled that out. And so I went to school in the Bay Area where there was a huge Asian population, and everyone there is like, quote unquote, like super woke. But you still see, like in San Francisco, there's so many anti-Asian hate crimes going on. So they're not that woke. It's like a cover up for their actual feelings that have now just recently like surfaced. It was always there, but people just blame it on like the hate speech and the coronavirus. But I feel like it was always there. It was our lived experiences, but we've just been gaslit and invisible for so long that people are now just taking attention to like what's going on in the Asian American community. And a lot of our stories have never been seen in like the news media, and you see a lot of like these Asian American stories are on like Next Shark, NBC Asian America, not like with the front page or New York Times. So when I actually saw that people were having these conversations about racism within the Asian American community and all of these things, I was like, oh my God, finally. Like, I had a conversation with a friend like last year, and she was saying like, do you think there will ever be like a quote unquote like Asian lives type of event, like where people like all of America is kind of going to focus on this? And I was so sure that there, like in my lifetime, this was never going to happen. So I do see that we acknowledge all of these different racism, that it is a step forward, but I think there's still so much change that needs to happen because a lot of people still don't see the validity of Asian American experiences. And I think for me, like going into work, I work in like a very white dominated space, very male dominated. And when you bring in the conversations about racism, it's always not directed with Asians because we're seen as the model minority. So they're kind of like, oh, you're fine. You're doing well. Like you got into the schools, you got into the jobs, like you're fine. You don't experience racism. But actually, like we had a workshop where Asian American women are the least likely group across all race genders to ascend into executive level C-suite positions. And I didn't know this, but my lived experiences where I had no mentors, no managers who were Asian or even women, that was a reality for me that was not really noted down anywhere else.
Yeah, Juno, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I definitely agree with the neglect and the Asian American experience. We talked a little bit about how like we judge other people for assimilating, not assimilating. And I think that's sometimes like a coping mechanism, like having like, and which causes some internalized racism because you see that you have like this limited identity that people put on you. And to protect yourself and your identity, you have to purposely mask a lot of things that might be perceived as too Asian. I remember when I was in Denver, I had to purposely not wear clothes that looked too Asian or play music that had like a flute or looked too Asian because people would associate that, even if it was just by chance in like a collection of a lot of things that have a mix of cultures, people would automatically group me in. And I can see very clearly that they have like a specific image of me and view all of my actions and words within that context. So I had to try really hard to be super white because I felt like that was the way I got respect from people and have the friends that I want and the relationships that I want. And when I moved to San Francisco, that became very apparent to me that people were seeing me as an individual because there were more Asians. But ultimately, I did move back to New York City because I think this is a random comment, but I remember I was wearing like yoga clothes and my brother looked at me, he was like, you look so white. And I was like, what? But then I thought about it, it's like, I guess because yoga classes and things are associated with like higher class or something. And maybe that's a lot of like white moms. But then if you go to San Francisco, a lot of people are dressed like that. And I feel like when I'm in New York City, I see a lot of like Asians and in San Francisco, at least it's in my company, you see a lot of people who do hide a lot of their Asianness and seem really white, especially in like corporate America, I feel like. So I think it's definitely really difficult to try to protect your culture while also having people see your identity.
I think it's also like, you know, different people, like what our culture is or our identity might not match with what we look like. And depending on when our parents immigrated here or when we immigrated here, like whenever that happened, who else was around at the time. It might be that like someone is really like quote unquote assimilated, but they didn't really assimilate. They were born here, didn't really have much of an Asian community, never had an opportunity to learn anything. And so they are, as they hold the culture of white America or Black America or whatever it is of the neighborhood where they lived, because that is their culture. That's what they grew up in. And then other people perhaps maybe immigrated at a time or to a different place where there was much more of a community, and then had the opportunity to be raised in an Asian culture and be given like language opportunities and cultural opportunities. And I think for one person to like judge the other as having assimilated or not having assimilated sort of unfairly doesn't take into consideration that different people immigrated and grew up under different circumstances.
You're totally
Sometimes
right.
sometimes it's a survival mechanism too, where we have to adapt to just get through day to day, and especially where I grew up, Asian was very much the minority. And so, like very foreign. It's like, what are you eating? My mom used to make me bento boxes. I'm like, throw it away on the side, like, do not see me with it. But going back to some of the points Nelly and Juno you brought up around like corporate America and just like having to fit in. Yeah, for the longest time, that was also my survival mechanism of fitting in to, pacify whatever structures are in place so that I can survive. But I think in the past handful of years, it's been this realization that no matter how much I try, there's going to be some people out there that just might not accept me for who I am, And does it make sense for me to try even harder if they're not going to come halfway, right? And open their eyes, hearts, and ears to me? And for some people, again, discussion like, no, just like maybe you could shift the words you say and say, okay, let me stand in front of Donald Trump, present myself as who I am. Maybe I change the way I talk a little bit, right? Change my hair, whatever. All this that was Donald Trump going to accept me, And in that instance, some people are like, oh, that's little, And I'm like, yeah. So there's, if he exists in the world, there's people similar to him with these very limited perspectives of the world. And at the end of the day, it's not really on us to have to change what we wear, what we eat, how we talk, how our hair is set up, right? And like for me, it's been like really liberating as a thought to finally let some of that go and to figure out what do I like, what do I enjoy, putting that into my life rather than holding a container that is to make other people happy, to make other people accept me. Yeah.
Thank you guys for all your input. At this point, we will be opening the floor up to our participants now. And thank you, Han, for showing us the big message. So yeah, if you are a participant, you can mute from now on, or wherever you see fit, or you can ask questions in the chat. You can direct them to everyone, or you can just direct them to Han, and she will read it out loud for you guys at some point. But yeah, we'll continue with our scheduled questions. Han, you can stop sharing now. Oh, okay, so going into sort of a segue now into the sort of second half of what I wanted to talk about in this panel, which is how have you guys coped with your internalized racism, and do you have any advice to share?
Something that has really shifted my sense about kind of like dominant culture and racism and internal racism is kind of shifting my perspective, right? Like I think in the United States, when we are such an island with these huge oceans on either side of us, and there's just been this narrative of American exceptionalism, like people come here and this is like it, like it's like the best place on earth. But and we can get locked into that mindset. But I find that if I expand my mindset and think about the world at large, you know, I mean, within Asia, right? I mean, China is a huge population. India is a huge population. Economically, they're like very powerful economic forces out there. America is not the only place in the world. And so when I take that perspective, sometimes people's racism towards me seems kind of funny and silly. Like, who do you think you are? Don't you know that the world has changed? Like, it's really not your place anymore.
Yeah, and the biggest population is Asia, as of the entire 7.7 billion, right? And it is just kind of crazy how there's so much racism against Asian folks. And I would say, you know, going back to the conversation of media, what's helped tremendously for me is diversifying my media intake. I'm following the folks that, you know, fit a certain structure, type, body shape, whatever it is, and diversifying the people I follow, you know, even as it pertains to just Asian perspectives, diversifying all shapes, sizes, colors, backgrounds, and even the film I watch. Myself, I identify as a gay Asian man, and, you know, especially for queer media, there's a lot of centering around white perspectives, if not most of it in the West, where even if you have an Asian man, it's Asian man finds love with this white man who, you know, did nothing wrong, even though he treated him like shit the entire movie. It's like, oh, you love me. And I made it a point to just, you know, just diversify that. And so I've been exploring a lot of queer media happening in Thailand, a lot of Southeast Asia, and Eastern Asia. And it really shifted my perspective of how I accept love and how I see love too. And it's fascinating. It's like very, you know, there's like, we watch love in films and we get like a dopamine hit. We're like, oh my God, yes. Like, oh my gosh. And we get trained, right? Where this is what we see. So this is what we kind of have to yearn for. And I think it's a little bit of a power we have to pick and choose what we intake to switch that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think just like remember, right? Like Hollywood is not the only film industry in the world. Bollywood is actually larger than Hollywood. The Korean music scene is huge and strongly competing with the American music scene. And outside the US, I think is more of a dominant force. And we in the United States can forget that sometimes.
Absolutely.
All right. Oh, sorry.
No, that's it. I was just like, yes, yes.
So a question that we have from someone in the chat is, how far would you say we have to go in defining what it means to be Asian American? Since internalized racism seems to come from our own conception, other people's conceptions of being Asian American.
So anyone can answer this one. But Juno, do you want to start?
I think I'm not totally sure this is the answer that you might be looking for, but I think in terms of like having our conception of what it means to be Asian American and how to define that, I think just like recognizing what your experience is and making sure you're like projecting that to other people and you're not holding back anything and tuning into what seems right to you and what you want to share. And I think what you said before earlier about Stephen, about like using the power to like control what intake you have, I think in the same way, like you can, even if often society is telling you that your needs are not as relevant or your culture and your voice is not as relevant, just if you see yourself tending to do that or others tending to do that, just step forward and say they're relevant. This is so Um, like my cousin teaches at a very wealthy white neighborhood, and there's one student in her class, it's a kindergarten class, who's Korean. And I remember they had to share stories about their families, and she was saying that she has an uncle in Seoul or whatever in Korea, but she said, "Oh, I can't share that because nobody will understand." Um, and she had to really encourage her, like, "No, let me help you. Like that is relevant. People will understand if you can, if you want to share it." So yeah, I think definitely just like stepping up and recognizing that your experiences and your culture is real. Yeah.
And your experiences matter, right? It's whatever you're feeling, and if you're feeling marginalized or something doesn't feel right in the conversation, we're often gaslit and told, no, like, don't feel that way. Right? And then when we take on this gaslighting, sometimes it shows up as the internalized racism that we carry because it was put upon us. And so, first and foremost is whatever you're feeling, totally, there's layers to it of like, what is it exactly coming from? But yeah, I would say that, yeah.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, just going to unmute for a second. So some of you may or may not know me, but right now I'm just, attending the panel. But I was the one that asked the question in the chat, and while I was listening to what everyone was saying, I kind of just wanted to, and apologies for any background noise, but I just wanted to add on because Juno, I was listening to you talk about, how Asians are kind of different in SF and New York, and it just made me think about what someone else had said in a different panel about, what it really means, like how our image as Asian Americans, like what that is. And, I think his name is Andrew Kung or something, who he did this photo series where it was just like, you have those stock images of all of these white people doing these normal everyday things, but instead of white people, he depicted Asians doing that. And so depicting Asians in, everyday scenarios that we would normally see white people in, but we wouldn't necessarily imagine ourselves in. And so I just wanted to add on, like, I do think it's kind of like we don't often see that, which is kind of why, like, we, or personally, like, I feel like, it's kind of why we feel a little ostracized in all of these other different, scenarios. So yeah, that's just like my piece, but.
I can kind of add on to that. I think a lot of what Asian American identity has been put in the forefront is what white people perceive Asian Americans as versus Asian Americans redefining their own identity. And I think for me, I really want to fight against those stereotypes that are thrown onto me. So if I see a space or an opportunity for me to like just disrupt people's imagination of what I should be, then I will go do that, even if it's like something I don't really want to do right now. So like if there is an opportunity for me to be really loud about like race or gender or being a minority or being neurodiverse, I will raise my hand and just really, really loud about it because people expect me to be quiet as an Asian American woman. So then I just say, fuck it. I'm going to curse, I'm going to be loud, and I'm going to disrupt your perception of me. And like, even with work and like personal life, I think it's up to us as the next like generation of young Asian American people and individuals to be super loud and kind of like say fuck you to what our parents have been telling us to like put our heads down, just work hard, because that's not working. Like we're still getting killed, hate crimed. So I don't think that's the way to go. So if you do see an opportunity where you can raise your voices, just go and do that. So I love what the Asian Articles is doing. You guys are young, like in high school, and so passionate about this. And I think it is up to the young people, the second generation, third generations, to speak up for people who can't speak English well, because as we know it, English is like what is seen as powerful. So if we can't like get our message across and unify ourselves, then we will never be seen as an actual American. We'll always be seen as Asian hyphen American. And I think like for white people, they're never seen as European dash American. They're just seen as normal Americans. So I think in your question, like how far would you say we have to go? I would say really, really fucking far.
And on that note, we will be ending the panel tonight at 8:45 on the dot. Thank you to everyone who showed up and to the people who left in the middle. I hope they enjoyed the panel, and for everyone who's left here, I hope you guys enjoyed this entire 45-minute panel. And to all the panelists, thank you guys so much for being here. I think Han is going to send a link to registration for the rest of our remaining 2 panels. Yes, it is bit.ly/CHACHATS TAA, which stands for the Asian Articles. So if you're here attending or a panelist, you can go to that link to register for other panels. But if you're not available on those days, thank you so much for making it to our first panel. I would say this was a success. I really loved hearing what everyone had to say. And yeah, that's it for tonight. And thank you, everyone, and have a good evening/morning.
Thank you so much. Have a good day or evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.